Billionaire CEO denied being the father of the twins. 5 years later, their faces revealed the truth. The pregnancy test clattered across the granite countertop of Sebastian Drake's penthouse, spinning like a roulette wheel before settling between a bottle of vintage scotch and his leather-bound planner. The plastic stick might as well have been a grenade for the way Sebastian recoiled from it, his face transforming from shock to something harder, something Isabel Torres had never seen in the 2 years they'd been together. "You planned this," Sebastian said, his voice stripped of all warmth. Not a question. An accusation delivered with the precision of a closing argument. "You actually planned this." Isabel stood in the center of his living room, her hands instinctively moving to her still flat stomach, a protective gesture for lives Sebastian had already decided didn't exist in any way that mattered to him. The city stretched beyond the windows, glittering and indifferent, 40 stories of separation between them and the ordinary world where people didn't look at pregnancy announcements like they were elaborate cons. "Sebastian, please just listen." "No." He turned from the window, backlit by the setting sun so his face became a shadow, unreadable except for the rigid set of his shoulders. "You listen. I know exactly how this works. I've seen it before. Women target men like me every single day, and you were just patient enough to make me believe you were different." The words landed like slaps, each one designed to bruise. Isabel had prepared herself for surprise, maybe even for fear or confusion. She had not prepared herself for this complete dismantling of everything they had built, for the surgical removal of trust that had once felt unshakable. She thought about the morning he had made her breakfast in this very kitchen, dancing badly to jazz while scrambling eggs, telling her he had never felt this at ease with anyone. She thought about the weekend they drove upstate and got lost on purpose, sleeping in the car under stars he named incorrectly just to make her laugh. She thought about the night he told her about his mother's death, crying in her arms with a vulnerability that had felt like a gift, like proof that his walls could come down for the right person. She thought about discovering she was pregnant and feeling joy before fear because she believed he would want this too, would see it as the beginning of something rather than the end. "Target you." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, and she hated herself for it. She forced steel into her words. "Sebastian, I fell in love with you because of who you are, not what you have. I never asked you for anything." He laughed, and the sound was ugly in a way that made her flinch. "You mentioned your brother's rehab costs exactly twice. Casual mentions, strategic timing. Just enough to let me know you had financial pressure without directly asking. That's how it starts, right? Plant the seed. Make the mark think helping was his idea." Isabel felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. Some core belief about who this man was and what they meant to each other. "My brother's rehab," she repeated slowly, tasting the bitterness. "I mentioned that because you asked why I was crying. Because I had just gotten off the phone with a facility that said they couldn't hold his spot. That was me being honest, not manipulating you. And then you got pregnant." Sebastian moved to the bar cart, pouring amber liquid with the measured control he brought to everything in his life. "Right after I mentioned restructuring my estate. You don't think that's convenient timing?" "Convenient." Heat flooded Isabel's face, anger finally cutting through shock. "You think I planned to get pregnant? We were careful, Sebastian. Biology doesn't follow your paranoid timeline." "Don't." He pointed at her with the glass, liquid sloshing dangerously. "Don't act like I'm unreasonable for protecting myself. I've been down this road before. I know exactly how it ends." There it was. The ghost that had haunted their entire relationship. The woman Sebastian never wanted to discuss, whose shadow fell across every vulnerable moment they shared. "I'm not Victoria," Isabel said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Whatever that woman did to you, I'm not her. These babies are real. This pregnancy is real. I'm not performing anything." That's exactly what she said. Sebastian finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. Word for word, actually. Very convincing performance, too. Had ultrasounds, morning sickness, the whole production. Even scheduled a miscarriage for after the engagement party. "I found out 2 days before we were supposed to announce that she was never pregnant at all. Just an elaborate scheme to access my assets and social standing." Isabel absorbed this information, understanding flooding through her alongside a desperate hope that maybe if she could just make him see the difference, they could survive this. Sebastian, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's horrible and cruel, and she deserves whatever consequences she's living with now. But I'm standing here actually pregnant, carrying your children. Not one baby, twins. You can see the ultrasound. You can feel them moving if you just... He stepped back as she moved toward him, his body language closed and defensive. I'm not doing this. I'm not falling for the same con twice. It's not a con. Her voice rose, echoing in the vast space that had once felt romantic and now felt like a courtroom. These are your children, yours and mine. We created them together, and they're real, and they're coming whether you choose to believe in them or not. Then I guess you'll have to figure that out on your own. Sebastian walked to his desk and pulled out a business card, holding it out with the impersonal courtesy of a banker declining a loan. This is my attorney. If you want to pursue this legally, that's your right. But I'm not playing the role of devoted father-to-be for someone who's been playing me for a fool. Isabel stared at the card, not taking it. She looked at the man she loved, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time how completely he had fortified himself against ever being hurt again, even if it meant destroying something genuine in the process. She saw her future in that moment, raising these babies alone, explaining someday why their father wasn't there, carrying this rejection inside her like a stone she'd swallow daily just to keep moving forward. I never wanted your money, Sebastian. She spoke quietly now, all the fight draining from her body, replaced by exhaustion so profound she felt ancient. I wanted you. The man who sang off-key in the shower and fell asleep holding my hand and told me his dreams like they were secrets. I wanted the person I thought you were, not whoever this is standing in front of me. That person doesn't exist, he said flatly. That was just the version of me stupid enough to let someone get close. Consider this me getting smart again. Isabel felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. Not when he had already taken so much. She straightened her spine, memorizing his face because she knew this was the last time she would willingly be in the same room with him. I'm going to raise these babies, and I'm going to love them with everything I have. And when they ask about their father, I'm going to tell them the truth, that he was too broken to let himself be loved, and that his loss is infinitely greater than theirs, because they'll have me, and you'll have nothing but your suspicion and your wealth and your empty penthouse. She turned toward the door, the pregnancy test still on the counter, evidence that would never be examined. Behind her, she heard Sebastian pour another drink, the sound of ice against glass, the sound of a man convincing himself he had dodged a bullet. Isabel. His voice stopped her at the door, and for one fractured second, she let herself hope he was about to take it all back, to tell her he was terrified and stupid and sorry. She turned back. Don't contact me again unless it's through my attorney. I mean that. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and walked out of the penthouse, into the hallway where the elevator waited like an escape route. The doors closed on Sebastian's world, on the life she had imagined, on the man she had loved who turned out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face. She made it to the lobby before the first sob broke free, and by the time she reached the street, she was crying so hard a concerned woman asked if she needed help. I'm fine, Isabel lied, one hand on her belly where two hearts beat steadily, oblivious to the fact that their father had just erased them before they even had names. I'm going to be fine. She walked away from the building, away from Sebastian, away from the future she had envisioned, and with every step she felt something harden inside her. Not bitterness exactly, but determination born from absolute necessity. She would survive this. She would raise these babies. She would prove that love didn't require his belief to be real. Behind her, high above the city, Sebastian stood at his window and watched her figure disappear into the crowd. His hand pressed against the glass, something hollow settling into his chest like a stone he would carry for years, though he told himself repeatedly he had made the only sensible choice, that he had protected himself, that he had done exactly what any intelligent man would do. The pregnancy test remained on his counter, a piece of plastic that would haunt him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, evidence he refused to examine because looking at it might crack the certainty he was desperate to maintain, and certainty was all he had left now that he had thrown away everything real. Isabel learned that survival has a texture, rough and unforgiving, like swallowing sand every morning just to make it through the day. The twins arrived on a Friday evening in late winter, their entrance marked by pain so consuming Isabel forgot her own name for hours, forgot everything except the primal work of bringing life into a world that felt hostile. She labored alone in a hospital room with fluorescent lights that hummed like anxious bees, attended by nurses who were kind but strangers, their sympathy well-meaning but insufficient. When Mateo emerged first, his cry sharp and immediate, Isabel wept from the sudden understanding that this sound would be her North Star for the rest of her life. Luna followed minutes later, quieter than her brother, her eyes already searching for something beyond the bright lights and unfamiliar hands. "Do you want to call anyone?" the nurse asked gently, and Isabel shook her head because there was no one to call who could fix the fundamental wrongness of bringing two lives into the world without the person who helped create them. She took her babies home to a studio apartment that smelled like fresh paint and hope disguised as practicality. She learned what it meant to function on sleep measured in stolen minutes rather than restful hours. She learned to nurse twins while sitting on the floor because the second-hand couch made her back scream. She learned which cry meant hunger and which meant the inexplicable sadness that sometimes overtook Luna in the middle of the night, a grief that seemed too ancient for someone so new. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion, though her body felt like a battleground. The hardest part was the loneliness that felt like drowning in plain sight, surrounded by a city of millions but utterly alone in ways that made her understand why people pray to God even when they're not sure God is listening. She would sit in the rocking chair at 3 a.m, a baby on each arm, and talk to the universe. Not prayers exactly, but negotiations, pleas, sometimes just reports on her day like she was checking in with an invisible supervisor who might care that she had survived another 16 hours. Carmen Reyes appeared in Isabel's life like an answered prayer she hadn't known she was making. The elderly woman lived 2 doors down, and she showed up one evening when Isabel was sitting in the hallway crying because she couldn't unlock her door while holding 2 diaper bags, 2 car seats, and the weight of her entire existence. Carmen simply started helping without asking permission or offering platitudes. She became a fixture, appearing at strategic moments with food that tasted like home and wisdom that felt like being held. "You're doing better than you think," Carmen told her one evening, spooning soup into Isabel's mouth while Isabel nursed both babies. "Nobody wins prizes for suffering beautifully. You just have to survive until surviving gets easier." Isabel went back to work when the twins were 3 months old, taking a position as a junior architect at a firm that paid enough to keep them housed and fed but not enough to stop the constant calculations of whether she could afford both groceries and heat. She worked during the day while Carmen watched the twins, and at night, after they were asleep, she did freelance drafting work, her eyes burning from screen glare, her coffee cold beside her keyboard. There were moments of pure, distilled joy. Mateo's laugh sounded like music boxes, bright and surprising. Luna was more serious, watching the world with careful attention, but when she smiled it was like witnessing something sacred, a permission slip to believe things might actually be okay. Isabel would catch herself staring at them while they slept, memorizing the curves of their faces, and she saw Sebastian's features constantly. Mateo had his father's distinctive widow's peak and the exact shape of his ears. Luna had inherited those striking gray-blue eyes that changed color in different light, the Drake family trait that appeared in every generation like a genetic signature. Isabel stopped flinching when she noticed these resemblances and started feeling something closer to vindication. These children were proof of the truth Sebastian had refused to believe. She met Diana Park at a support group for single mothers, bonding over terrible coffee and shared war stories about daycare costs and the specific loneliness of making every decision alone, of being the only adult who showed up. "You ever hear from the father?" Diana asked one afternoon, her tone carefully neutral. "No," Isabel said, and the word came out clean and final. "He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us." She told the twins simplified versions of the truth when they started asking questions around age 3. Mateo wanted to know why other kids had daddies and he didn't, and Isabel told him that sometimes people aren't ready to be parents, and that didn't mean there was anything wrong with him. It meant something was wrong with the person who left. Luna never asked directly, but she drew pictures of families with a conspicuous empty space where a fourth figure should stand, and Isabel would find these drawings tucked under her pillow like evidence in a case that would never go to trial. She saw Sebastian's face sometimes, in business magazines at the grocery store, in online articles about tech acquisitions and philanthropic initiatives. He looked successful and distant, and Isabel felt nothing when she saw these images. Or rather, she felt the nothing very intensely, a deliberate emptiness that proved she had moved beyond him into a life he couldn't touch. The twins grew into bright, curious children. Matteo was bold and physical, climbing everything, testing boundaries with the confidence of someone who had never learned to doubt himself. Luna was introspective and artistic, spending hours drawing elaborate worlds populated by creatures that didn't exist anywhere except in her imagination. Isabel enrolled in night classes toward her architecture license, wanting to give her children more than just survival, wanting to show them that limitation was temporary, that struggle could transform into strength if you refused to let it crush you. There was a night when everything nearly collapsed. Matteo had a high fever and Luna had an ear infection, and Isabel's brother called from rehab saying he was thinking about leaving early, and Isabel sat on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning genuinely unsure if she could keep going, if survival was even worth this much pain. But then Matteo called for her, his voice hoarse from fever, and she went to him because that's what you do when you're someone's entire world. She held him through the worst of it, felt Luna's small hand slip into hers in the dark, offering comfort even though she felt terrible herself, and in that moment Isabel understood something fundamental. This was her life, messy and hard and beautiful in ways Sebastian would never comprehend. She got a promotion at the firm, a significant raise that meant she could finally stop the freelance work, could afford a 2-bedroom apartment where the twins got their own room. They decorated it together, space-themed bedding for Matteo, a gallery wall for Luna's ever-expanding art collection. The day they moved in, Isabel stood in the doorway watching her children play and felt pride that had nothing to do with Sebastian and everything to do with what she had built from nothing. Carmen came to the housewarming with tears in her eyes. "I knew you'd make it," she said, squeezing Isabel's hands. "I knew you were stronger than you looked." That night, Isabel sat in her own room, after years of sleeping on couches and floors, and let herself acknowledge something she had been avoiding. She was lonely. Not for Sebastian specifically, but for partnership, for adult conversation that didn't revolve around children, for someone to share the weight of decisions and celebrate the small victories. She downloaded a dating app but deleted it almost immediately, overwhelmed by the prospect of explaining her situation to strangers, of opening herself up to potential rejection when she had barely survived the first devastation. The twins had a birthday party at a community center. Isabel made cupcakes that were lopsided and covered in too much frosting. She watched Matteo and Luna blow out their candles together, their faces identical masks of concentration, and she took approximately 100 photos because she never wanted to forget how they looked in this moment. Completely happy, completely loved, completely hers. Later that week, she saw Sebastian on the news, giving an interview about innovation and legacy. He looked older, his temples graying in a way that might have been distinguished if Isabel had cared enough to form an opinion. He talked about building something that mattered, about giving back, words that sounded hollow to her ears. She turned off the television and went to check on the twins. Luna woke up when Isabel came in, her gray-blue eyes catching the hallway light. "Mama, are you sad?" "No, baby," Isabel said, settling on the edge of Luna's bed. "I'm not sad. I'm grateful. I have you and your brother, and that's everything I need. Do you ever wish we had a daddy?" Luna's question was innocent, but it hit Isabel like a punch to the sternum. She chose her words carefully. "I wish your daddy had been brave enough to love you. But his fear doesn't change how perfect you are. You and Matteo are my whole heart, and nothing about that is missing." Luna seemed to accept this, settling back into her pillow. Isabel stayed there long after Luna fell back asleep, watching her daughter breathe, thinking about Sebastian somewhere in the city living his uninterrupted life, having no idea who his children were becoming, what he had given up, what he would never get back. She had survived. She had more than survived. She had built a life that worked, a family that was complete even in its unconventional shape, a future that didn't require Sebastian's validation or his presence or his belief. And if sometimes she still felt the ghost of what they had been together, still remembered how it felt to love him before she knew how easily he could discard that love, well, that was just proof she was human, that she could carry scars and keep moving forward anyway, that broken things could heal even if they never looked quite the same. Sebastian Drake had perfected the art of moving through life without feeling it, attending events that meant nothing while maintaining the appearance of engagement, making conversation without connection, existing in a state of perpetual emotional anesthesia that felt like safety. The gallery opening was mandatory, something his publicist had arranged as part of his company's community outreach initiative. Sebastian walked through rooms full of artwork, seeing shapes and colors but not registering meaning, his mind already on the conference call scheduled for later that evening, the endless forward momentum that kept him from standing still long enough to think. The youth section was tucked near the back of the gallery, a bright space filled with the chaotic creativity of children whose work hadn't yet been disciplined by technical training or self-consciousness. Sebastian almost skipped it entirely, but something made him pause, some instinct that pulled him toward a large canvas dominating the center wall. It was a self-portrait, ambitious in its scope and execution for someone so young. The nameplate beside it read, "Self-Portrait by Luna Torres, age 5. Sebastian felt the floor shift beneath him before his conscious mind caught up with what he was seeing. The girl in the painting had eyes that stared directly at the viewer, demanding to be seen. Eyes that were gray-blue and distinctive, eyes that Sebastian saw every morning in his own mirror. The Drake eyes, genetic enough that strangers had commented on them his entire life, rare enough that seeing them staring back at him from a child's self-portrait made his hands start shaking. But it wasn't just the eyes. It was the tilt of the head in the portrait, the way the artist had captured a slight asymmetry in her own smile that Sebastian recognized because his sister had the same asymmetry, because it marked every Drake in family photos going back 3 generations. His vision tunneled. He moved closer to the display, where other paintings were arranged around the self-portrait in a series depicting family scenes. One showed 2 children playing together, and Sebastian's breath caught as he focused on the boy. The artist had captured him in profile, and there was no mistaking the widow's peak, the distinctive ear shape, features that marked Sebastian's family like a signature on every birth certificate. Beautiful, isn't it? A woman appeared beside him wearing a gallery volunteer badge, her smile warm. That young artist is incredibly talented. Only 5 years old and already showing this kind of emotional depth and technical skill. Sebastian's throat had closed up, making it impossible to respond. His heart was racing in a way that might have been a heart attack if he'd been older, if his body wasn't simply responding to the shock of recognition. Her mother brings both children to every workshop and museum program we offer, the woman continued, oblivious to Sebastian's distress. Despite working full-time, she never misses an opportunity to nurture their creativity. Those are the parents who restore your faith in humanity, you know. Sebastian managed a nod that felt more like a spasm. The boy was named Matteo, according to another placard, and there was a photograph of the 2 children together. Twins, both of them carrying his DNA like evidence he had tried to pretend didn't exist, like proof of a truth he had spent 5 years denying. He pulled out his phone with hands that wouldn't stay steady and photographed everything. The nameplate, the paintings, the photo of the children. The curator was still talking, but Sebastian heard nothing except rushing in his ears, like standing at the edge of a waterfall and realizing you were about to go over. He made it to the bathroom before the panic attack fully hit, his heart racing, his breathing shallow and rapid, his mind replaying every moment of that day when Isabel had stood in his penthouse carrying these children and he had called her a liar, had accused her of the exact manipulation she had never attempted, had destroyed them before they even had a chance. He remembered the pregnancy test on his counter, evidence he had refused to examine because examining it would have required admitting he might be wrong, would have required him to be vulnerable in a way he had sworn he would never be vulnerable again. When he could finally breathe normally, he left the gallery without saying goodbye, without making the donation his publicist had promised, without doing anything except getting to his car before he completely fell apart. He sat in the parking garage staring at the photos on his phone, zooming in on details that confirmed what he already knew but kept trying to deny. These were his children. There was no doubt, no room for skepticism. He saw his own face reflected in theirs, saw his family's genetic markers like a map he had been refusing to read. He hired a private investigator that evening, not because he doubted what he had seen, but because he needed to understand what he had missed, needed to construct a narrative that made sense of the past 5 years. The report came back within 3 days, accompanied by photographs that made Sebastian's chest physically ache. There was Isabel walking home from work carrying grocery bags, her face tired but determined, no longer the young woman who had loved him but someone harder, someone who had survived. There were the twins playing in a modest park, laughing at something only they understood, their joy complete and untouched by his absence. There were dozens of photos documenting their daily life, a life that functioned perfectly well without him, a life he had no right to enter but couldn't stop staring at. The report was thorough and devastating. It detailed Isabel's work schedule, noting the double shifts she had worked when the twins were infants, the night classes she had taken toward her architectural license. It documented her financial situation, stable but far from comfortable, built entirely through her own effort without a single request for child support or assistance. Most importantly, The report noted that Isabel had never tried to contact him, never filed for support, never used his name in any context. She had simply erased him from their lives and built something whole without him, had proven that his absence wasn't fatal, just disappointing. Sebastian sat in his penthouse surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt obscene, looking at photos of children playing in a public park, wearing clothes that were clean but clearly not expensive, eating snacks that came from bulk stores rather than artisan markets. He had been so catastrophically wrong about everything. He called his older sister Lillian, who listened in silence while he explained about the gallery, the paintings, the unmistakable features that proved these children were his. When he finished, there was a long silence that felt like judgment. "Are you telling me," Lillian said finally, her voice dangerously quiet, "that you have children you abandoned because of your paranoia about Victoria?" "I thought she was lying," Sebastian said, his voice breaking. "After what happened before." "Don't." Lillian cut him off sharply. "Don't use Victoria's name to justify what you did to Isabel. You destroyed 3 innocent people because you were too much of a coward to get a simple paternity test. You chose your fear over the truth." Sebastian had no defense. "I need to fix this." "You can't fix this," Lillian said bluntly. "You can maybe make it less catastrophically wrong. Those children are 5 years old. You missed everything. First words, first steps, every milestone that matters. You can never get that back. You don't get redemption, Sebastian. You get the opportunity to show up and do the work, and you have to accept that it might never be enough." After Lillian hung up, Sebastian sat in the dark and let himself feel the full weight of what he had done. He thought about Isabel in labor alone, about first birthdays he hadn't celebrated, about scraped knees he hadn't kissed, about nightmares he hadn't soothed, about 1,000 ordinary moments that made up a childhood he had voluntarily missed. He drove to Isabel's neighborhood that night, parking blocks away from the address in the investigator's report, watching the building where his children lived. He saw lights in windows, shadows moving behind curtains, evidence of a life unfolding without him. When Isabel finally appeared, walking home late from what must have been a long day, Sebastian's first instinct was to approach her, to try to explain, to start fixing what he had broken. But he watched her stop on the sidewalk to adjust her bags, saw her shoulders hunched with exhaustion, and understood that approaching her now would be violence disguised as apology, would be for his benefit rather than hers. So he stayed in his car and watched her disappear into the building, and he felt something break open inside him that had been sealed shut for 5 years, felt all the emotions he had been avoiding flood through him in a way that left him gasping. He went home and looked at the photographs again, really looked at them this time, seeing not just evidence of his mistakes but whole people whose lives were unfolding in patterns he would never fully understand because he hadn't been there to witness the formation. He started writing a letter to Isabel, and it took 17 attempts to find words that felt honest rather than self-serving. How do you apologize for erasing someone's truth? How do you ask forgiveness for violence disguised as protection? The final version was simple, an acknowledgement that he had been catastrophically wrong, that she and the children deserved infinitely better, that he understood if she never wanted to see him but needed her to know he knew the truth now, needed her to know he was sorry in ways that transcended language. He included no requests, made no demands, simply offered a phone number and the ghost of hope that maybe, someday, she might be willing to let him try to be something other than the man who had destroyed her. He mailed the letter on a morning when rain was falling like judgment, and then he waited in the particular hell reserved for people who have to live with the consequences of their choices, knowing that whatever happened next was entirely out of his control, knowing that the life he had built on certainty and caution was actually just a fortress protecting nothing but his own fear. The letter sat on Isabel's kitchen counter for 4 days like an unexploded bomb, Sebastian's handwriting achingly familiar even after 5 years of deliberately forgetting. She walked past it multiple times each day, making breakfast for the twins, packing lunches, herding them through morning routines, while the envelope remained unopened, its presence somehow growing heavier with each passing hour. Carmen noticed it on day 3 and asked if Isabel wanted her to throw it away, an offer that was tempting in its simplicity. But Isabel said no, because avoiding it felt like giving Sebastian power he didn't deserve. She finally opened it late on a Thursday night after the twins were asleep, after she had cleaned the kitchen and folded laundry and exhausted every possible excuse for delay. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the pages, and she hated herself for that trembling, hated that he could still affect her after all this time. The letter was not what she expected. There were no excuses, no justifications wrapped in apologies. Sebastian took responsibility with a directness that felt almost violent in its honesty. He acknowledged that he had accused her without proof, that he had abandoned their children based on paranoia rather than reality, that he had spent 5 years building a life on willful blindness. He told her about the gallery, about seeing Luna's painting, about the moment he understood he had committed the worst act of his life and would spend the rest of his existence trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he had destroyed. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you," he wrote. I know that saying sorry would be grotesquely insufficient. I spent 5 years convinced I had protected myself, and it took one painting to show me I had actually committed an act of violence against the 3 people who deserved my protection most. You told me the truth, and I called you a liar. You offered me a family, and I threw it away like trash. The letter included no requests for meetings, no demands for access. It simply ended with a phone number and the quiet acknowledgement that if she never called, he would understand because he deserved nothing better. Asterisk. Isabel read the letter 3 times, her emotions cycling through anger, grief, vindication, and something more complicated she couldn't quite name. Part of her wanted to burn the letter, to send him a message that said his recognition came 5 years too late. But beneath the anger was a recognition that his letter carried the weight of genuine suffering rather than performative guilt. She didn't respond immediately. She needed time to think, needed to separate her feelings from what was best for Matteo and Luna. She talked to Diana, who advised extreme caution. She talked to Carmen, who surprised her by suggesting that people could change if the pain of staying the same became unbearable. "I'm not saying forgive him," Carmen clarified. "I'm saying decide what's best for those babies, not what punishes him most effectively." Isabel spent weeks with the decision. She looked at Matteo and Luna and tried to imagine what she would tell them when they asked why she had kept their father away if he wanted to know them, if he was willing to try. She also had to confront her own feelings, the reality that she had loved Sebastian once, deeply and completely, in a way that had made her vulnerable to his rejection. Part of her still carried that love like scar tissue that ached in certain weather. She started seeing a therapist, Dr. Brennan, who asked questions that made Isabel uncomfortable in productive ways. "What are you most afraid of if you let Sebastian back?" Dr. Brennan asked during their 3rd session. "That he'll hurt the twins the way he hurt me," Isabel said immediately. "That he'll be inconsistent, that he'll disappear again when things get difficult." "What else?" Isabel took a breath. "That I'll remember how much I loved him. That I'll be stupid enough to let him hurt me again." Is loving someone stupid? It is when they've proven they'll destroy that love without hesitation. Dr. Brennan leaned forward. "You've survived 5 years of single parenthood, built a career, raised 2 healthy children. That's not the biography of someone stupid. Maybe the question isn't whether you're strong enough to protect yourself. Maybe it's what you want for your children, and whether you're strong enough to give them that even if it's complicated." Isabel called Sebastian on a Sunday evening when the twins were at Diana's house, when she had the space to fall apart if the conversation went badly. Her hands shook as she dialed, and she almost hung up 3 times before he answered. "Hello." Sebastian's voice was cautious, like he was answering a call that might change everything. "It's Isabel." She kept her voice steady, refusing to let him hear how much this cost her. "I got your letter." A sharp intake of breath. "Thank you for calling. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't." She wasn't making this easy, wasn't giving him anything he hadn't earned. "I spent 3 days looking at that envelope before I could open it." "I'm sorry." "Stop." She cut him off before he could finish. "I didn't call to hear you apologize. Apologies are words, and words are the cheapest currency that exists. I called because I need to decide what's best for Matteo and Luna, and I need to understand if letting you into their lives will help them or damage them further." Matteo and Luna. Sebastian repeated their names like he was tasting them, like he was trying to make them real. "Those are beautiful names. They're beautiful children, and they've had a beautiful life without you." Isabel's voice was hard. "That's what you need to understand, Sebastian. You didn't break us. You hurt me in ways I'm still recovering from, but you didn't break us. We're whole." "I know," Sebastian said, and he sounded destroyed. "I saw the photos. You're incredible, Isabel. You built something amazing." "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't put me on a pedestal to make yourself feel better about what you did. I'm not incredible. I'm exhausted and angry and trying to figure out if letting you into our lives will help my children or just teach them that people who hurt you get second chances they don't deserve. This isn't about us, Sebastian. There is no us. You made sure of that 5 years ago." "You're right. So what do you want? What do I need from you?" Isabel had prepared for this question, had rehearsed this part. "If I decide to let you know them, and that's a massive if, it will be entirely on my terms. You don't get to make demands or use your money to manipulate the situation. You'll attend therapy and provide me proof of attendance. You'll respect my authority as their parent without question. And most importantly, if you commit to this, you're committing for life. You don't get to walk away again if it gets difficult. Do you understand?" "Yes," Sebastian said immediately. "Don't agree so quickly," Isabel warned. "Think about what I'm saying. Being a parent isn't about grand gestures or guilt-driven gestures. It's about showing up every single day, even when you're tired, even when they're difficult, even when it's boring and thankless. It's about putting them first always. It's about accepting that you'll never get back what you missed, and that they might never forgive you for missing it. Can you actually do that?" There was a long pause, and Isabel appreciated that he was taking the question seriously rather than rushing to reassure her. "I don't know if I can do it," Sebastian finally admitted. "I don't know if I'm capable of being what they need. But I want to try. Not because I deserve a second chance. I don't, but because they deserve to have every possible person who loves them, and I already love them even though I don't know them. That has to count for something." "It counts for nothing," Isabel said bluntly. "Love is the minimum requirement, the baseline. The question is whether you'll show up when love isn't enough to make it easy, when it's 3 in the morning and someone's sick, when it's the 1,000th homework session and you're exhausted, when they hate you for setting boundaries. Will you show up then?" "I will," Sebastian promised. "I'll show up. I'll do whatever it takes." "I'll think about it," Isabel said, giving him nothing definitive. "I'm not promising anything. In the meantime, you'll start therapy immediately. You'll send me confirmation of every session. And you'll wait until I contact you. No showing up at our home, no surprises, no trying to control the situation. Do you understand?" "I understand," Sebastian said. "Thank you." "I'm not doing this for you," Isabel interrupted. "I'm doing this because those children might someday ask me why I kept their father away, and I need to be able to tell them I gave you every opportunity to prove you were worth knowing. This is about them, Sebastian. Don't ever forget that." She hung up before he could respond, before he could say anything that might crack the armor she had spent 5 years building. She sat at her kitchen table and let herself cry for the first time in months, not from sadness but from the exhaustion of carrying everything alone and the terror of letting someone else help carry it, even partially, even conditionally. When she picked up the twins later, Matteo immediately asked if something was wrong, his intuition sharp as always. "I'm not sad, baby," Isabel said, pulling him close. "I'm just thinking about big things." "What big things?" Luna asked, climbing into her lap despite being almost too big for it. Isabel kissed the top of Luna's head, breathing in the scent of her daughter's shampoo. "Just grown-up stuff. Tell me about your day." And they did, their voices overlapping in that way twins had, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's stories, and Isabel listened and held them close, knowing that whatever happened next, these two people would remain her anchor, her purpose, her proof that survival could transform into something bigger and more beautiful than just enduring. The confirmation emails from Sebastian's therapist arrived every week like clockwork, documenting his attendance without commentary or detail. Isabel filed them in a folder on her laptop, building a record of consistency that surprised her more each week. Part of her had expected Sebastian to attend 1 or 2 sessions and then manufacture reasons to stop. Work conflicts, travel commitments, the usual excuses wealthy people used when therapy got uncomfortable. But week after week, the confirmations came, and Isabel found herself checking for them with a mixture of anxiety and something she couldn't quite name that might have been hope. She continued her own therapy sessions. Dr. Brennan helped her understand that anger and grief could coexist with curiosity and cautious optimism, that feeling multiple contradictory things didn't make her weak or confused, it made her human. They talked about forgiveness, and Isabel insisted repeatedly that she would never forgive Sebastian, that forgiveness wasn't something he had earned or ever would earn. Forgiveness isn't about erasing harm, Dr. Brennan said gently. It's about releasing yourself from the requirement to carry that harm forever. You can acknowledge what he did was unforgivable and still decide not to let it control your present or your children's future. I'm not controlled by it, Isabel argued. I built a whole life. I'm fine. You've built a remarkable life, Dr. Brennan agreed. But you also won't date, won't let anyone close, won't take any risks that might make you vulnerable again. That suggests the harm is still controlling some of your choices, even if you've learned to function around it. Isabel hated that Dr. Brennan was right. She had been so focused on protecting herself and the twins that she had forgotten how to imagine a future beyond stability and safety, had forgotten that living required more than just surviving. One evening, Luna asked about the man in her paintings. They were sitting at the kitchen table working on homework, or at least Mateo was working while Luna drew elaborate scenes in the margins of her math worksheet. Who is this person? Isabel asked, noticing that Luna had been creating a series of portraits lately, always the same figure with distinctive features. That's our daddy, Luna said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Isabel's heart stuttered. What makes you think about him? Luna shrugged with the casual wisdom of a child who didn't yet understand the weight of her own questions. I wonder about him sometimes. Like what he looks like and if he thinks about us and why he's not here. Mateo looked up from his homework, his expression immediately guarded. Mom said he wasn't ready to be a daddy. That means he didn't want us. That's not exactly what I said, Isabel corrected gently. I said he wasn't ready, which is different from not wanting you. Sometimes adults make mistakes because they're scared, and those mistakes hurt other people. But that doesn't mean the people who got hurt did anything wrong. Was he scared of us? Luna asked, her voice smaller now. No, baby. He was scared of something that happened to him before you existed, something that had nothing to do with you. But that doesn't make it okay that he wasn't here. You both deserved better. Mateo put down his pencil. Do you think he'll ever want to meet us? This was the moment Isabel had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. She could lie and tell them no, protecting them from potential disappointment. Or she could tell them the truth and let them have agency in the decision that would affect their lives. Actually, Isabel said slowly, choosing each word carefully, I need to talk to both of you about something important. They both gave her their complete attention, and Isabel felt the weight of what she was about to say, how it would change everything regardless of how carefully she framed it. Your father knows about you now, she began. He saw some of Luna's artwork in a gallery, and he realized you were real and that he had made a terrible mistake. He wrote me a letter saying he was sorry and asking if there was any way he could be part of your lives. Luna's eyes went wide with surprise and something that looked like cautious joy. But Mateo's reaction was different, his expression closing down, walls going up in a way that reminded Isabel painfully of Sebastian. Why does he want to know us now? Mateo's voice was sharp, accusatory. Why didn't he want to know us before? Those are really good questions, Isabel acknowledged. And I think if we decide to meet him, you should ask him those things directly. But the important thing is that this is your choice too. Do you want to meet your father, or do you want things to stay the way they are? I want to meet him, Luna said immediately. I want to see if he looks like us, if he has our eyes. Mateo, what do you think? I don't know, he admitted, and Isabel could see him struggling with conflicting emotions. What if he's mean? What if he says he doesn't want us again? Isabel pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him in a way that she hoped communicated safety. I won't let him hurt you. If we meet him, it will be somewhere safe, and I'll be right there the whole time. And if he ever tries to leave again, we'll be fine because we've always been fine, right? Just the three of us. Just the three of us, Mateo repeated, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. After the twins were in bed, Isabel sat alone in her living room and forced herself to make the final decision. Every protective instinct screamed at her to keep Sebastian away, to protect her children from potential disappointment. But another voice, quieter but insistent, reminded her that she had survived 5 years specifically so her children would have choices, so they wouldn't be limited by her fears or her pain. If she kept Sebastian away now out of fear rather than genuine danger, she would be taking something from them for her own comfort. And that wasn't the kind of mother she wanted to be. She called him the next evening, her heart pounding as she waited for him to answer. "I've decided to give you a chance to meet them," she said without preamble. "But I need you to understand what that means. This isn't about you getting what you want or easing your guilt. This is about me giving my children the opportunity to know their father. And if you waste that opportunity or hurt them in any way, I will remove you so completely from their lives that you'll forget they exist. Do you understand?" "I understand," Sebastian said, emotion barely contained in his voice. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Isabel interrupted. "I don't owe you anything. But I owe them everything, and part of that everything might be you, if you can prove you're worth knowing." They arranged to meet at a science museum on a Saturday afternoon, a public neutral space where the twins would have things to explore and distractions if the meeting became too intense. Isabel told them that evening, keeping her tone carefully neutral, emphasizing that this was just a meeting, that nothing had to change unless they wanted it to. "What should we call him?" Luna asked, practical as always. "You can call him Sebastian," Isabel suggested, "unless you feel like calling him something else. But we'll start with his name and see what feels right." The days leading up to the meeting were strange for Isabel, filled with nervous energy she couldn't quite contain. She found herself thinking about Sebastian more than she had in years, remembering not just the betrayal but the good parts that had come before it. She remembered how he used to listen when she talked, really listen, like her words mattered more than whatever he had been doing. She remembered the way he laughed at himself when he made mistakes, that self-deprecating humor that had made him seem human despite his wealth. She remembered falling in love with him so completely that the idea of him not being in her life had seemed impossible, like imagining a world without gravity. But she also remembered the cruelty in his voice when he accused her of manipulation, the coldness in his eyes when he dismissed her truth, the sound of his door closing behind her as she walked out carrying his children and his rejection in equal measure. Those memories were sharper, more painful, and she held on to them like armor. Diana came over the night before the meeting, bringing wine and moral support. "Are you sure about this?" Diana asked, watching Isabel pace around her living room. "No," Isabel admitted. "I'm not sure about anything. But I think this is one of those times when being unsure doesn't mean you're making the wrong choice. What are you hoping happens tomorrow?" Isabel thought carefully before answering. "I'm hoping he shows up on time. I'm hoping he's kind to them. I'm hoping they see something in him that helps them understand where they come from. And I'm hoping that when it's over, whatever happens, they feel more complete rather than more confused." "What about you? What are you hoping for yourself?" "I'm hoping I stay strong enough not to forgive him just because it would be easier than staying angry," Isabel said honestly. "I'm hoping I remember that he destroyed me once, and that letting him close again would be the stupidest thing I could do. And I'm hoping that tomorrow proves I was right to give him this chance, because if it doesn't, I'll never forgive myself." That night, after Diana left and the twins were asleep, Isabel stood in their bedroom doorway watching them breathe. Mateo was sprawled across his bed, all limbs and abandon. Luna was curled into herself, her hand tucked under her cheek, her expression peaceful in sleep. They were so perfect, so completely themselves, and the thought of anyone hurting them made Isabel feel capable of violence in a way that surprised her with its intensity. She went to her own room and pulled out the box from the back of her closet, the one that held mementos from her relationship with Sebastian that she hadn't looked at in years. She opened it and sorted through the contents with the emotional distance of an archaeologist examining artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. There were photos of them together, looking happy and oblivious to what was coming. There were ticket stubs from concerts and movies. There was a postcard he had sent from a business trip, his handwriting cramped but affectionate. And there, at the bottom, was the pregnancy test she had shown him that day in his penthouse, the piece of plastic that had started everything unraveling. Isabel held it and felt something crack open inside her chest. This was the moment she could have fought harder, could have insisted he look at evidence, could have demanded a paternity test immediately. But she hadn't, because forcing someone to believe you felt worse than walking away with dignity. She couldn't change history. She couldn't undo the past 5 years. And sitting here wishing for different choices was pointless when the present demanded all her attention and strength. She put everything back except the pregnancy test, which she placed in her purse. Tomorrow, if Sebastian asked why she hadn't fought harder, she would show him this and make him understand what he had thrown away, what he had refused to see. The morning arrived cold and bright. Isabel dressed the twins carefully, wanting them to look their best for their own confidence rather than to impress anyone. She put Luna in her favorite dress with the constellation pattern and let Matteo wear his superhero shirt even though it was getting slightly small. They looked beautiful and entirely themselves, and Isabel took a photo of them standing together before they left, wanting to remember this moment, the last morning before everything changed. "Are you nervous, Mama?" Luna asked in the car. "A little," Isabel admitted, because lying to her children had never been her style. "Are you?" "A little, but also excited." "Is that weird?" "That's not weird at all, baby. It's okay to feel lots of different things at the same time. Feelings don't have to make sense to be real." Matteo was quiet in the back seat, staring out the window, his small face serious. Isabel reached back and squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back without looking at her, and that small gesture told her everything she needed to know about his emotional state. They arrived at the museum early. Isabel wanted to be settled and calm when Sebastian appeared, wanted to meet him from a position of strength rather than anxiety. They explored exhibits while they waited, the twins momentarily distracted by interactive displays and models of the solar system, their natural curiosity overriding their nervousness. And then she saw him. Sebastian stood near the entrance scanning the crowd, looking older than she remembered but also somehow smaller, like the intervening years had taken something essential from him. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater rather than the suits he used to live in, and that small detail surprised her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. He spotted them at almost the same moment, and the expression that crossed his face was so raw and unguarded that Isabel had to look away, had to protect herself from the vulnerability she saw there. This was it. The moment that would change everything or nothing, that would answer questions she had been carrying for 5 years, that would prove whether love could grow back after being completely destroyed or whether some things, once broken, stayed broken forever. She took a deep breath, squeezed the twins' hands, and walked toward the father they had never known, hoping she was strong enough to handle whatever came next, hoping her children would emerge from this moment intact regardless of what happened, hoping that the decision she had made, to risk this meeting, to give Sebastian this chance, would turn out to be wisdom rather than the biggest mistake of her life. Sebastian saw them before they saw him, and the sight stole whatever carefully rehearsed words he had prepared during 3 sleepless nights. Isabel looked exactly the same and completely different. Still beautiful, but carrying herself with a hardness that hadn't existed when she loved him, when she had been soft and open in ways he had taken for granted. The twins were exploring a display about planetary motion, their heads tilted at identical angles, their movements synchronized in that uncanny way twins had. Matteo was taller, his build stocky and solid, moving with the confidence of someone who tested boundaries regularly. Luna was more delicate, her focus absolute as she examined something through a magnifying glass, and when she turned slightly, Sebastian saw his mother's profile in miniature, the exact slope of her nose, the way her chin came to a point. He had prepared himself to see his children, had looked at the photographs from the investigator until he had memorized their faces. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of them in motion, alive and real and completely whole without him. They were entire people with personalities and histories and preferences he knew nothing about, and the distance between who they were and who he had imagined felt impossible to bridge. Isabel spotted him, and her entire body language changed, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, every muscle preparing for potential battle. She said something to the twins, and they both turned to look at him with expressions of naked curiosity mixed with wariness. He forced himself to walk toward them with steady steps, even though his legs felt unreliable, even though every instinct screamed at him to run because he didn't deserve this chance and they would see through him immediately. "Sebastian," Isabel said when he reached them, her voice carefully neutral. "These are your children, Matteo and Luna." The formal introduction felt surreal, like being introduced to people at a business function rather than meeting the children he had spent 5 years denying existed. Sebastian knelt down to their eye level, his throat tight with emotions he didn't know how to name. "Hi," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'm really glad to meet you both." Luna studied him with unsettling intensity, her gray-blue eyes, his eyes, examining him like he was a specimen under her magnifying glass. "You look like us," she said finally, her tone matter-of-fact. "Mom said you would, but I didn't believe her until now." "I do look like you," Sebastian agreed, trying to keep his voice steady. "You have my eyes, and Mateo has my widow's peak." Mateo's hand went immediately to his hairline, touching the distinctive point. "Did you give it to me on purpose, or did it just happen?" "It just happened," Sebastian said. "That's how genetics work. Sometimes you get features from your parents whether anyone plans it or not. Kind of like how we didn't plan to not have a dad, but it happened anyway." Mateo's voice was sharp, accusatory, and Sebastian felt the impact in his chest like a physical blow. He glanced at Isabel, who was watching him with an expression that clearly said this was his test, that how he handled this moment would determine everything that came after. He turned back to Mateo, forcing himself to meet his son's eyes. "That's exactly right," he said. "You didn't plan to not have a dad, and that wasn't fair to you. I made a terrible mistake a long time ago, and you paid the price for my mistake, which is the worst thing I've ever done. I don't have a good excuse. I was scared and wrong, and I hurt you and your sister and your mom, and I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have right now." Mateo absorbed this, his expression not softening but perhaps becoming slightly less hostile, like Sebastian had passed some preliminary test by not lying or making excuses. Luna, meanwhile, had moved closer, examining Sebastian's face with the same intense focus she had been applying to the museum exhibits. "Can I draw you?" she asked suddenly. "I would love that," Sebastian said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "I've seen some of your work. You're incredibly talented." Luna beamed, her entire face transforming with pleasure at the compliment. They moved to a bench area where the museum provided paper and pencils for sketching, and Luna immediately began working while Mateo hung back, still suspicious, still protecting himself from potential disappointment. "Do you want to explore the exhibits?" Sebastian asked Mateo, trying to find some way to connect. "I heard they have a new display about space exploration." "I guess," Mateo said with affected indifference that didn't quite hide his interest. They walked through the museum together, an awkward configuration of father and son who were strangers attempting to find common ground. Isabel followed at a distance with Luna, close enough to intervene if needed but far enough to give them space. Sebastian tried to make conversation, pointing out interesting facts from the displays, but everything felt forced and unnatural. Then they reached the robotics exhibit, and something shifted. Mateo's face lit up with genuine interest as he examined the mechanical displays, his defensive posture momentarily forgotten. Sebastian remembered reading in the investigator's report that Mateo loved building things, and he seized on this common ground desperately. "Do you build robots?" Mateo asked, forgetting for a moment to maintain his guard. "I used to," Sebastian admitted. "When I was your age, I was obsessed with how things worked. I took apart everything in our house. My mom was not happy when I disassembled the toaster and couldn't get it back together." Mateo laughed, a sound so pure and unexpected that Sebastian felt something crack open in his chest, felt years of carefully maintained emotional distance crumble in the face of his son's genuine joy. "Mom doesn't let me take stuff apart," Mateo said. "She says we can't afford to replace things if I break them." The casual mention of financial constraint landed heavily, a reminder of the life Isabel had been living while Sebastian accumulated more wealth than he could ever spend. The disparity felt obscene. "Well, maybe we could build something together sometime," Sebastian offered carefully, not wanting to overstep but desperate to offer something. "Something new that we wouldn't have to worry about breaking." "Maybe," Mateo said, and though it wasn't enthusiastic, it wasn't rejection either. They regrouped with Isabel and Luna, who had completed her sketch with remarkable speed. The drawing was sophisticated for a 5-year-old, capturing not just Sebastian's features but something in his expression, some emotional truth he hadn't known he was broadcasting. She had drawn him looking sad, his eyes searching, and the perceptiveness stunned him. "This is beautiful," he said honestly, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite control. "You really captured something true." "You look sad," Luna observed with the blunt honesty of children who hadn't yet learned to soften difficult truths. Are you sad? Sebastian glanced at Isabel, seeking permission or guidance, and found her watching him with an unreadable expression. He chose his words with precision, understanding that everything he said was being evaluated. I'm sad about the time I missed with you and your brother, he said. I'm sad about hurting your mom. But I'm also happy to be here right now meeting you. Both things can be true at the same time. That's what Mama says, Luna said, nodding sagely. She says feelings are complicated and that's okay. Your mama is very smart, Sebastian said, and this time when he looked at Isabel, their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary, and something passed between them that might have been understanding or might have been acknowledgement of shared history or might have been nothing at all. The hour Isabel had allotted passed surprisingly quickly. They had lunch in the museum cafeteria, an ordinary domestic scene that felt extraordinary to Sebastian, who had spent 5 years imagining these children as abstractions rather than real people who needed food and bathroom breaks and had preferences about whether their sandwiches were cut into triangles or rectangles. He watched Isabel help Luna with her drink, saw how she automatically wiped Mateo's face when he got ketchup on his chin, observed the 1,000 small acts of caregiving that made up the foundation of love. This was what he had missed, not dramatic milestones captured in photographs, but the accumulation of ordinary moments that built intimacy and trust. When it was time to leave, Luna hugged him without prompting, her small arms wrapping around his waist with easy affection that made Sebastian's eyes burn with unshed tears. Mateo offered a handshake instead, a more measured gesture that Sebastian respected even as it broke his heart a little. He shook his son's hand with appropriate seriousness, understanding that earning Mateo's trust would take time and consistency, that affection couldn't be rushed or forced. Can we see him again? Luna asked Isabel as they prepared to leave, her voice hopeful in a way that made Sebastian hold his breath. Isabel looked at Sebastian with an expression impossible to read, weighing factors he couldn't see, making calculations about risk and benefit that would determine his future. We'll see, she said, which wasn't a yes but wasn't a no either, which was more than Sebastian had any right to hope for. He walked them to their car, reluctant to let this fragile connection end, desperate to hold on to this moment before reality reasserted itself. Before Isabel got in the driver's seat, he stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. Thank you for this, he said quietly. I know it cost you something to be here. It cost me everything 5 years ago, Isabel said, her voice low enough that the children couldn't hear. Don't make me regret spending what I have left. She drove away, and Sebastian stood in the parking lot watching their car disappear, feeling the absence like a physical thing, like something vital had been removed from his body. His phone buzzed with a text from Lillian. How did it go? He typed back, *, I met my children. They're perfect. I'm destroyed. *. Lillian's response came immediately. *, good. You should be destroyed. Now comes the hard part, showing up tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, until destroyed becomes normal and normal becomes something you can build on. *. Sebastian drove home to his empty penthouse and sat in the silence that used to feel like peace but now felt like punishment. He thought about Mateo's suspicious eyes and Luna's easy affection and Isabel's carefully maintained walls. He thought about the years he couldn't get back and the future that depended entirely on whether he could prove himself worthy of the smallest space in their lives. He looked at the drawing Luna had given him, the one that showed him sad and searching, and he went to his refrigerator and taped it to the door, where he would see it every day. A reminder of what he had, what he'd lost, and what he might possibly earn back if he was willing to do the work of becoming someone his children could trust, someone who showed up not because it was easy but because it was necessary, because they deserved a father who chose them every single day. 3 months of supervised visits had established a routine that felt both fragile and necessary, like walking across ice that might crack at any moment but had held so far. Sebastian came to the park on Saturday afternoons and pushed Luna on the swings while Mateo attempted increasingly dangerous feats on the climbing equipment, testing boundaries in ways that made Isabel's heart race. He attended a school art show where Luna's paintings were displayed, sitting in the back row and clapping too enthusiastically, his pride obvious and touching despite his attempts to remain understated. He learned that Mateo preferred waffles to pancakes, that Luna hated having her hair in ponytails, that both twins were competitive about everything except with each other, where they operated as a unit against the world. The supervised visits were excruciating in their limitations, like being allowed to observe a life he couldn't fully enter, like watching a movie through a window. He wanted to take them places, to buy them things, to compensate for his absence with grand gestures that would prove his commitment. But Isabel had been explicit about not using money as a substitute for actual presence, so Sebastian restricted himself to showing up consistently and trying to earn their trust through reliability rather than spectacle. Then he made the mistake that threatened to destroy everything he had carefully built. The letter arrived at Isabel's apartment on a Tuesday morning, official and expensive, embossed with the letterhead of one of the city's most prestigious private schools. It congratulated her on Mateo and Luna's acceptance for the upcoming school year, complete with full scholarships funded by an anonymous donor. The letter was professionally impersonal, but Isabel knew immediately who had arranged this, and the rage that flooded through her body was so intense she had to sit down before her legs gave out. She called the school and confirmed what she already suspected. The scholarship had been established specifically for her children by a donor whose identity was barely concealed behind the thinnest veneer of anonymity. She hung up and immediately called Sebastian, her voice shaking not with sadness but with fury that felt volcanic. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 7th Street, she said without preamble, without explanation. "Right now." Sebastian arrived 20 minutes later looking confused and slightly afraid, his usual composure showing cracks. They sat at a corner table far from other customers, and Isabel waited exactly 3 seconds before launching her attack. "You arrogant, controlling piece of work," she started, her voice low and deadly. "You actually thought you could manipulate my children's education without asking me." Sebastian's confusion shifted to understanding and then to defense, his expression hardening. "I was trying to give them opportunities. That school has resources your current school can't match." "You thought what?" Isabel interrupted, her voice rising despite her efforts to keep this private. "You thought you knew better than me what my children need? This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is you using your privilege and wealth to undermine my authority as their parent." "I wasn't undermining you," Sebastian argued, his jaw tightening. "I was trying to help. They deserve the best education possible." "They deserve what I decide they deserve," Isabel cut him off, her words sharp as knives. "I chose their current school deliberately. It's diverse, it's grounded in reality, it prepares them for the actual world they'll live in. Your fancy private school would isolate them. They'd be the scholarship kids surrounded by wealthy children whose parents don't look like their mother. Did you think about that? Did you consider for 1 second what it would feel like for them to be the charity cases?" Carlos's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. "You're right that I should have asked you first," he conceded, though the words sounded forced. "But wanting better for them isn't the same as undermining you. You've done an incredible job raising them alone." "Don't," Isabel said sharply. "But now they don't have to be alone," Sebastian continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I can help. I can provide things you can't. Why is it so impossible for you to accept help?" "Because your help comes with strings," Isabel shot back. "You threw us away, Sebastian. You called me a liar and destroyed me, and you don't get to waltz back in and start making executive decisions like you have any right to their lives beyond what I choose to give you. I'm not waltzing in, I've been showing up every week for 3 months. I've followed every rule you set, respected every boundary. At what point do I get to actually be a father instead of a supervised visitor?" "When you earn it," Isabel snapped, her anger now fully unleashed. "When you prove that you understand what being a father actually means, which apparently you still don't. And this scholarship rejection is you protecting them?" Sebastian's face flushed with emotion. "Or is it you punishing me at their expense?" The accusation landed like a slap, like he had reached across the table and struck her. "Don't you dare," Isabel said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "Don't you dare suggest I would ever do anything that harms my children. I've given them everything while you've given them nothing but years of absence and now 3 months of supervised visits. You don't get to judge my choices when your choice was to deny they existed." "I know what I did," Sebastian said, his voice breaking slightly. "God, I know. I'm trying to fix that now. But you won't let me. You keep me at arm's length. You control every interaction, every moment. When does that change? When do I get to be their actual father?" "You're not their father," Isabel said, the words coming out cold and final, designed to wound in the way only truth could. Not in any way that matters. Biology doesn't make you a father. Being there makes you a father, showing up makes you a father, and you weren't there. So no, you don't get equal say. You get what I give you, and if that's not enough, you can go back to your perfect life and forget we exist. It seemed pretty easy for you before. The silence that followed was terrible, heavy with things that couldn't be unsaid. Sebastian looked at her with an expression that mixed hurt and anger and something that might have been recognition, that he had just destroyed what he was trying to rebuild, that his impatience and his need for control had proven Isabel's worst fears correct. I'm going to leave now, Isabel said, standing up with forced calm. And I'm going to think very seriously about whether continuing these visits is in my children's best interest, because what you did today proves that you still don't understand what I need from you. I don't need your money or your connections or your grand gestures. I need you to show up and be humble and let me lead. And if you can't do that, we're done. Isabel, wait. Sebastian reached for her arm, but she pulled away like his touch burned. Don't touch me. Don't call me. Don't show up at the park on Saturday. I'll contact you when and if I decide this is worth continuing. She left and drove home with tears of rage streaming down her face, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. The twins were at school, giving her space to fall apart privately, to scream into a pillow and break a plate in the sink and sit on her bathroom floor wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake or dodged a bullet. When she finally calmed down, she called the private school and formally declined the scholarship with a terseness that left no room for argument. She then blocked Sebastian's number, not permanently, but long enough to make a point, and sent a message through his therapist that all visits were suspended indefinitely pending further evaluation. That evening, when the twins asked why Sebastian hadn't come to the park like he always did, Isabel had to explain that sometimes adults disagree about important things, and sometimes those disagreements meant taking breaks. Mateo looked relieved more than disappointed, which told Isabel that her son had been waiting for this moment, had been protecting himself against the inevitable disappointment he assumed was coming. But Luna's face crumpled with genuine sadness. Did we do something wrong? She asked, her voice small. No, baby. Isabel pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her daughter's shampoo. You didn't do anything wrong. This is grown-up stuff about how decisions get made. Carlos forgot that I'm your mom and I get to decide what's best for you. Will we see him again? I don't know yet, Isabel said honestly, because lying to her children had never been her style. I'm still deciding. Sebastian spent the days after their fight in a state of barely functional misery, replaying the conversation obsessively, seeing clearly all the ways he had failed, all the moments where he could have chosen differently. Lillian called him after 3 days of radio silence, her tone sharp with barely contained frustration. You really thought going behind her back was a good idea? She asked without preamble. I wanted to give them something, Sebastian said miserably. I wanted to provide opportunities. You were trying to buy your way into their lives, Lillian corrected sharply. That scholarship wasn't about them. It was about you feeling less guilty, about proving your worth through the one thing you know you're good at instead of doing the harder work of showing up with humility. So what do I do now? You give her space, Lillian said. You respect her boundary even though it's killing you. And you figure out why you keep trying to control situations where the whole point is learning to let someone else lead. Sebastian increased his therapy sessions to twice a week, finally being honest with Dr. Morrison about his control issues, about how the scholarship had been an attempt to prove his worth through provision rather than presence. You're trying to skip steps, Dr. Morrison explained. You want to jump from, I showed up for 3 months to, I get equal parenting rights. But trust doesn't work that way. Trust is built in increments, in small consistent actions over extended time. The scholarship was you trying to leapfrog that process. Sebastian wrote another letter to Isabel, this one even more raw than the first, acknowledging that he had violated her trust and proven her fears valid, that he understood why she had cut off contact and that he would wait however long it took for her to decide if he deserved another chance. He mailed the letter and waited, understanding that the waiting was part of the work, part of proving he could respect her boundaries even when they hurt. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Sebastian's life, longer even than the 5 years of not knowing his children existed, because now he knew what he was missing, knew their laughter and their questions and the way Luna's eyes lit up when she drew and the way Mateo's guard slowly lowered when he got interested in something. He had tasted what it felt like to be their father, and the absence was devastating. The space that Sebastian's absence created in their weekly routine was both relief and complication, and Isabel found herself wondering why she felt anything at all about someone she had tried so hard not to need. James Rivera had been orbiting her life for months, a presence so gentle Isabel hadn't noticed his attention until Diana pointed it out with barely concealed excitement. He worked as a contractor on one of her architectural projects, and he had the kind of easy warmth that felt almost suspicious after the intensity of her history with Sebastian. "He likes you," Diana said one afternoon while they watched their children play at the park. "And he's actually nice, which seems to make you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," Isabel protested weakly. "I just don't have time for dating." "You haven't had time for dating in 5 years," Diana pointed out. At some point, that excuse starts sounding like fear. But then James asked her to dinner, mentioning casually that the restaurant had a great kids menu if she wanted to bring the twins, and something about the inclusion of her children made it feel safer, less like a date and more like an exploration of possibility. She said yes, surprising herself. The following Saturday, she found herself at a restaurant with a man who wasn't Sebastian, watching him interact with Mateo and Luna with natural ease that should have been basic but felt extraordinary. James asked them questions about school and actually listened to their answers. He laughed at Mateo's jokes without condescension and praised Luna's latest drawing without being patronizing. He was present and attentive in ways that should have been minimum requirements but felt like gifts. "Your mom tells me you both love science," James said, his tone genuinely interested. "Have you been to the aquarium downtown?" "No," Mateo admitted, his initial wariness softening slightly. "We should go sometime," James suggested, looking at Isabel for permission. "If that's something you'd be interested in." Isabel felt warmth spreading through her chest, felt the possibility of something uncomplicated and healthy. "That sounds fun," she said carefully. "If you're serious." "I'm completely serious," James said, and his smile was open and honest in a way that made Isabel want to believe in second chances. They started seeing each other regularly. James came to Mateo's soccer games and cheered from the sidelines without trying to coach or insert himself where he didn't belong. He brought Luna special art supplies, thoughtful gifts that showed he paid attention without being extravagant. He texted Isabel during the day just to check in, to ask how she was doing, to share small moments. The contrast with Sebastian was stark and constant. Where Sebastian had been intense and consuming, James was steady and comfortable. Where Sebastian had been suspicious and guarded, James was open and trusting. But the ease of being with James also made Isabel question whether she was choosing him for the right reasons, whether she was running toward something genuine or just running away from the complication of Sebastian. One evening, Diana called with her usual directness. "So things with James seem good," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "They are good," Isabel agreed. "He's everything I should want. He's kind and patient and present. The twins like him. I can actually imagine a future with him." "But," Diana prompted, hearing what Isabel wasn't saying. "But I keep comparing him to Sebastian," Isabel admitted, hating herself for it. "And I hate that I'm doing that because Sebastian doesn't deserve to be the standard I measure everyone against. But I can't help noticing that James never challenges me, never pushes back, never makes me feel anything difficult. And I don't know if that's because he's healthy and respectful, or if it's because I'm choosing safe over real." "Maybe it's both," Diana suggested gently. "Maybe you need safe right now. You've had enough intensity to last 3 lifetimes." Isabel wanted to believe that, wanted to accept that comfortable was exactly what she deserved after years of struggle. But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was missing, some spark or depth that made her feel truly seen rather than just accommodated. Dr. Brennan helped her understand that she had been operating in survival mode for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to actually live, to want things beyond stability and safety. "You've been focused on protecting yourself and the twins," Dr. Brennan said during one session. "But at some point, protection becomes isolation. At some point, you have to risk being hurt again if you want to experience real connection." "I don't want to risk it," Isabel said honestly. "I don't want to give anyone that much power over me ever again." "That's understandable," Dr. Brennan acknowledged. But is the life you're building with James the one you actually want, or is it the one that feels safest? Those are different things, and only you can answer which one you're choosing. Isabel thought about that question constantly. She noticed herself pulling back slightly from James, creating space when he tried to get closer, maintaining boundaries that kept him at a safe emotional distance. And she noticed herself thinking about Sebastian at unexpected moments, wondering how he was handling her silence, whether he was still attending therapy, whether he understood why she had cut off contact so completely. She missed him, which felt like the ultimate betrayal of herself. How could she miss someone who had destroyed her? How could she think about Sebastian's intensity and passion and feel something that might be longing when she had James's steady kindness right in front of her? Matteo noticed the change in her mood during dinner one evening, his perception sharp as always. "Are you thinking about Sebastian?" he asked, his tone careful. The question startled her. "I am, actually. How did you know?" "You get the same look you had when we first met him," Matteo explained with the casual wisdom of children who observed everything. "Like you're trying to solve a really hard math problem." "That's exactly what it feels like," Isabel admitted, appreciating his insight. "Sebastian made a mistake, and I'm trying to figure out if it's a mistake worth forgiving." "Do you want him to come back?" Matteo asked, and Isabel heard the vulnerability beneath his careful tone. "I want him to be someone you and Luna can trust," Isabel said carefully. "Whether I want anything else doesn't matter." But of course it mattered. It mattered enormously, in ways she was only beginning to admit to herself. Luna wandered into the room carrying the drawing she had made of Sebastian months ago, the one that showed him sad and searching. "Can we give this to him?" she asked, her voice small. "I want him to have it." Isabel looked at the drawing, at Sebastian's eyes staring out from her daughter's perceptive strokes, and felt something shift in her chest, some wall she had been maintaining start to crack. Her children had made their own decisions about their father, had formed their own attachments and desires, and maybe it was time she respected that instead of letting her own pain dictate their relationships. That night, Isabel sat alone in her apartment after the twins were asleep and finally read Sebastian's latest letter, the one that had been sitting unopened on her counter for 2 weeks, the one she had been too angry to look at. His words were raw and honest, acknowledging his mistake with the scholarship in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. "I understand if you're done with me," he wrote. I understand if I've proven myself unworthy of the trust you were willing to extend. But if you're willing to try again, I promise I'll work harder to earn it. Not because I deserve another chance, but because Matteo and Luna deserve a father who shows up with humility instead of arrogance, who asks instead of assumes, who follows your lead instead of trying to control the narrative. Isabel folded the letter and sat in her quiet apartment, thinking about Sebastian and James and the impossible choice between safety and risk, between the comfortable future James offered and the complicated possibility Sebastian represented. She picked up her phone and unblocked Sebastian's number. She didn't call him, not yet, but the act of unblocking felt significant, like opening a door she had slammed shut. Then she texted James, asking if they could talk soon about where things were going, about her need to figure some things out before getting more serious. Both conversations would be difficult. Both would require vulnerability that felt dangerous, that exposed her to potential hurt. But staying in the limbo of indecision felt worse than risking either choice, worse than continuing to hide behind walls that were starting to feel more like prisons than protection. The next morning, she woke up with a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She would call Sebastian and tell him he could resume the supervised visits, but with even stricter boundaries, with explicit understanding that one more violation would end things permanently. And she would talk to James honestly about her confusion, about her inability to move forward while she was still tangled in the past, about how he deserved someone who could give him their whole heart instead of the parts that weren't still bruised and healing. Both conversations would require a courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But her children were watching, learning from her about how to navigate difficult situations, and she wanted to teach them that honesty, even painful honesty, was better than comfortable lies. The call came at 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, the school nurse's voice professionally calm in the way that meant something was very wrong. "Matteo collapsed during recess," she said without preamble. "The ambulance is already here. You should come immediately." Isabel ran from her office without explanation, without grabbing her coat or her purse or anything except her keys. She drove to the school with her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. She arrived to find her son pale and small on a gurney, and Mateo's eyes found hers with the terror of someone who understood his body was betraying him in ways he couldn't control. Isabel climbed into the ambulance beside him, holding his hand and whispering reassurances she didn't believe, telling him everything would be okay while her heart screamed that nothing was okay, that the universe was cruel and unfair and she couldn't lose him, couldn't survive losing him. The hospital moved in organized chaos while Isabel answered questions about family medical history, and she realized with sickening clarity how little she knew about Sebastian's genetic background, how her anger at him might have actually put Mateo at risk. "Do you have contact information for the father?" a doctor asked, his tone urgent. "We need a complete family medical history as soon as possible." Isabel pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scrolling to Sebastian's newly unblocked number, and called him before she could second-guess the decision. He answered on the second ring. "Isabel." "It's Mateo," she interrupted, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay calm. "He collapsed at school. We're at Memorial Hospital, and they need you to come right now. They need your family medical history. Sebastian, I don't know what's wrong with him, and I'm so scared." "I'm on my way." Sebastian's voice was sharp with immediate focus, with the clarity that came from crisis. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. She hung up and returned to the exam room where Mateo lay small and frightened on a bed too big for him, machines beeping around him in rhythms that meant nothing to Isabel except that her son was sick and she couldn't fix it. Luna was still at school, being kept by Carmen, who Isabel had called in a panic from the ambulance. Sebastian arrived in less than 15 minutes, breathless and wild-eyed, his usual composure completely shattered. He took one look at Mateo lying in that hospital bed, and something in his face cracked open, all his walls collapsing in the face of genuine crisis. "I'm here," he said, moving immediately to the bedside. "I'm here now, buddy. You're going to be okay." The doctors took Sebastian aside for medical history, and when he returned 20 minutes later, he looked devastated in ways that made Isabel's stomach drop. "There's a genetic blood disorder in my family," Sebastian said quietly, his voice tight with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide. "My uncle had it. It's rare, but they think that might be what this is. They need to run more tests, and if it's positive, he'll need treatment. Possibly a bone marrow transplant." The words hit Isabel like physical blows, like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart until she couldn't breathe. "A transplant from who?" she managed to ask. "I'm being tested as a potential donor," Sebastian said. "If I'm not a match, we'll test other family members. My sister's already on her way. We'll find someone, Isabel. We'll fix this." They sat together in the waiting room, two people who had destroyed each other finding themselves forced into proximity by crisis, by the shared terror of possibly losing a child. James arrived after receiving Isabel's text, carrying coffee and wearing concern, and his presence created an uncomfortable triangle nobody had time or energy to acknowledge. "Thank you for coming," Isabel said to James, even as she felt the wrongness of him being there, felt how this moment belonged to her and Sebastian in ways that excluded everyone else. "Of course," James said, his eyes moving between Isabel and Sebastian, reading the situation with uncomfortable accuracy. "Is there anything I can do?" The tests came back with the diagnosis Sebastian had feared, a rare genetic blood disorder that would require intensive treatment and monitoring, possibly a bone marrow transplant depending on how aggressive it became. The doctor explained the options with practiced compassion, laying out treatment plans and discussing prognosis while Isabel tried to absorb information through the fog of terror. Sebastian was tested as a potential donor, and the wait for results became unbearable. Lillian arrived from out of town, getting tested immediately, bringing with her a presence that felt like family Isabel didn't know Mateo had. James sat with Isabel in the cafeteria during one of the long stretches of waiting, and she could feel him building up to something, could sense the conversation they needed to have finally arriving. "You still love him," James said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "Sebastian, you still love him." Isabel wanted to deny it, wanted to protect James from the truth. But lies felt obscene in the face of everything happening. "I don't know what I feel," she said honestly, tears streaming down her face. "But you're right that I'm not over him. And that's not fair to you. You deserve someone who's completely present, someone whose heart isn't still tangled up in someone else." I'm sorry, she continued, her voice breaking. You're everything I should want, everything that makes sense. But I can't give you what you deserve. Don't apologize, James said gently, his kindness somehow making this harder. I think I always knew I was the safe choice, not the real one. I was hoping safe would be enough. Safe should be enough, Isabel said through her tears. But it's not, James finished softly. And forcing it won't make either of us happy. They ended things with mutual sadness and respect, and James left with a grace that made Isabel cry harder, made her hate herself for not being able to love someone who deserved to be loved. The test results came back the next day. Sebastian was a partial match, close enough to serve as a donor with additional medical protocols. Lillian tested as an even better match, offering immediately without hesitation. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. With the right treatment combination and a transplant from Lillian, Mateo's prognosis was good. The disorder was manageable, not fatal, and he would live a relatively normal life with proper monitoring. During all of this, Luna finally arrived with Carmen, walking straight to Sebastian and taking his hand without hesitation, seeking comfort from the father she barely knew. "Is Mateo going to die?" she asked, her voice small and terrified. "No, sweetheart," Sebastian said, getting down to her level with a gentleness Isabel had never seen from him. "Your brother is sick, but we're going to take care of him. The doctors are very good, and Aunt Lillian is going to help make him better." "Are you scared?" Luna asked. "Yes," Sebastian admitted, and Isabel saw tears gathering in his eyes. "I'm very scared." "Are you?" "Yes," Luna said, and then she wrapped her arms around Sebastian's neck and held on tight, and Isabel watched her daughter seeking comfort from a father she barely knew, and something inside her chest broke open in a way that felt both painful and necessary, like a bone being reset after healing wrong. The days that followed were a blur of medical appointments and treatment plans and learning a new vocabulary of medical terms. Mateo's condition was serious but manageable, and the doctors laid out a clear path forward that involved monitoring and medication and eventually a transplant from Lillian. Sebastian showed up every day, sleeping in the hospital waiting room when he couldn't be in Mateo's room, bringing Luna by for visits, coordinating with doctors, handling insurance complications with the efficiency of someone used to making things happen. Isabel watched him show up consistently, watched him put aside his own comfort to be present for children who still weren't sure they trusted him, watched him become someone different than the man who had destroyed her 5 years ago. One evening, after Mateo had been released and was resting at home, Sebastian asked if he could talk to Isabel privately. They sat on her small balcony while the twins slept inside, the city humming quietly around them. "I want to thank you," Sebastian said quietly, "for letting me be there. I know I didn't deserve that chance." "I didn't do it for you," Isabel said, but her voice was softer than it would have been a month ago. "I did it for Mateo. That's what being a parent means, doing what they need even when it's complicated." "I'm starting to understand that," Sebastian admitted. "And I'm starting to understand that I can't use money or grand gestures to compensate for actual presence. The scholarship was me trying to fix everything at once instead of doing the slow work of earning trust." "At least you're learning," Isabel said, and there was less acid in her voice than there would have been before the crisis, before she had watched him show up day after day without making demands or trying to control the situation. "Can I ask you something?" Sebastian said after a moment. "That man who was at the hospital, James, were you seeing him?" "I was," Isabel said, her voice carefully neutral. Past tense. "He was everything I should have wanted, but I couldn't give him what he deserved because I wasn't over you. And that wasn't fair to him." Sebastian absorbed this information with visible surprise mixed with something that might have been hope. "You're not over me," he repeated, like he was testing the words. "Don't read too much into that," Isabel warned, though her voice lacked conviction. "Not being over someone doesn't mean forgiving them or wanting them back. It just means they left damage that hasn't healed yet. You destroyed something fundamental in me. My ability to trust, my sense of being worth loving. Those things don't heal just because you show up for a medical emergency." "I know," Sebastian said, his voice raw with emotion. "I know what I did to you. I know that showing up now doesn't erase 5 years of absence. But I want you to know that I see you, Isabel. I see how strong you are, how incredible you are as a mother, how you built a life from nothing. And I'm not asking for another chance with you. I'm just asking to keep showing up for Mateo and Luna until they decide whether I'm worth having in their lives permanently." Isabel looked at him in the dim light from the apartment, trying to separate the man who had hurt her from the man who was trying to do better, trying to see him clearly without the distortion of either love or hate. "Keep showing up," she said finally. "Prove that this isn't just crisis response. Prove that you can be consistent when things are boring and hard, when there's no drama to respond to, when it's just ordinary parenting. Do that, and maybe someday we can talk about what comes next. But right now, all I can offer is the possibility of co-parenting that doesn't destroy any of us in the process." "That's more than I deserve," Sebastian said quietly. "I'll take it." They sat in silence for a while, two people who had loved and destroyed each other, learning how to exist in the same space without combusting, learning that maybe broken things could be rebuilt into something new even if they could never be what they were before. And when Sebastian finally left, Isabel felt something shift inside her that wasn't quite hope but wasn't quite despair either. It was possibility, fragile and uncertain but real, the sense that maybe broken things could be rebuilt into something new, even if the rebuilding took years, even if the final shape looked nothing like the original. Isabel told Mateo and Luna the complete truth about their father on a Saturday morning that felt too ordinary for the weight of what she was about to explain. They sat together on the couch, and she spoke carefully about mistakes and fear and how sometimes adults hurt each other in ways that affect their children unfairly. She told them Sebastian was their father, that there had been confusion when they were babies that had kept him away, but now he wanted to be part of their lives if that was something they wanted too. Luna's response was immediate acceptance, her arms wrapping around Isabel in a hug that said she understood. But Mateo's reaction was more complicated: anger, confusion, and underneath it all, a hope he was desperately trying to protect. "Why didn't he believe you?" Mateo asked, his voice tight. Isabel chose her words carefully. "Your dad was hurt badly by someone before he met me, and that hurt made him scared to trust anyone. When I told him I was pregnant, his fear was bigger than his faith in me. It wasn't right, but it's what happened." "Does he love us now?" Luna asked. "I think he does," Isabel said. "But love isn't just a feeling, it's showing up. Whether his love is real is something you'll figure out by watching what he does." When Sebastian arrived for his next visit, Mateo confronted him immediately. "Why did you leave us?" Sebastian got down on his knees, tears already forming. "I was scared," he said honestly. "Someone lied to me before, and when your mom told me about you, I let that old fear be bigger than the truth. I didn't believe her, and that was wrong. I'm so sorry. Do you love us?" Luna asked, moving closer. "Yes," Sebastian said without hesitation. "I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "Prove it," Mateo said. "Show up forever, or don't show up at all." "I promise," Sebastian said. "I promise I'll be here." The backyard of Isabel's house, the one Sebastian had helped her buy, was full of people celebrating the twins' 9th birthday. Sebastian manned the grill while Isabel set up desserts, and when their eyes met across the yard, she didn't look away. They had been doing this dance for 3 years, co-parenting, building trust, existing in each other's orbit without naming what was growing between them. "Come help me with the candles," Isabel said, and Sebastian came immediately. Their hands brushed as they arranged candles on the cake, and this time neither pulled away. "Thank you," Sebastian said quietly, "for letting me back in, for giving me this." "You earned it," Isabel said. "You showed up. You kept showing up." Mateo called for them to watch him on his new bike, and both parents responded together, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Luna ran over with her latest drawing, a family portrait with 4 figures, all of them smiling. "We look happy," Sebastian observed. "We are happy," Luna said simply. Isabel looked at her children, at Sebastian, at the life they had slowly, carefully built from ruins. It wasn't the life she had imagined 5 years ago. It was better, harder one, more honest, built on truth instead of fantasy. Sebastian's hand found hers, and Isabel let him hold it. They weren't fixed. They weren't perfect. But they were whole in a way that mattered, in a way that proved love could grow back differently after being destroyed, that showing up was sometimes more powerful than never leaving. The truth was in the twins' faces, Mateo's widow's peak, Luna's gray-blue eyes, proof that some things couldn't be denied forever. And the truth was in Isabel's heart, slowly learning to trust again, slowly believing that maybe broken things, when carefully rebuilt, could be even stronger than before.